Yeah, an intensive care unit, sometimes called a critical care unit, basically is for patients who are particularly ill, who are either struggling to breathe by themselves or maintain their cardiovascular system. So you only really go into the critical care unit when you are actually very sick and you need a lot of nursing and technical care to keep you going, really.
And I doubt whether you come out of intensive care generally with this very quickly. I imagine it will take a little bit of time.
Well, surprisingly not. The people who go into intensive care, the average time that people spend in intensive care is about, with COVID-19, is only about 4 or 5 days on average, although that there is considerable variation for that. And sadly, and that those figures are whether people survive or not. So whether you survive or not, you tend to be in intensive care for an average of about 4 to 5 days. So
what kind of treatment will he be receiving? I mean, they say he's not yet on a ventilator, but that would seem the logical next step.
Well, I think what with patients who go into intensive care, one of the key things, as well as actually providing care, is actually monitoring them very carefully. And in this context, you'd be, with COVID-19, you'd be monitoring people's organ functions, making sure that their blood oxygen was continuing to be high enough, making sure that their kidneys were functioning, and dealing and making sure that they were able to maintain their blood pressure. And if any of these things were failing, that then they would provide what's called organ support in terms of supporting the breathing, which might actually just be giving them extra oxygen, but it might actually also ultimately mean going onto a ventilator. And possibly also renal dialysis if the kidneys are affected, but only about 1 in 5 people on intensive cares with COVID-19 require kidney dialysis or kidney support, I should say.
I suppose neither of us can know the answer to this question, but presumably the intensive care unit at St Thomas's will have been turned into a COVID-19 intensive care unit rather than just general intensive care.
I would certainly have expected that by now, but clearly people are getting ill from things other than COVID-19 at the moment, and although I'm sure the London hospitals are trying to separate, it's not always possible to achieve that separation when your primary role is to try and keep very sick people alive.
Lewis Goodall, the Newsnight reporter, has just tweeted this. A couple of doctors who are working on the COVID-19 frontline told me this afternoon that the fact that the PM received oxygen treatment last night indicated a strong possibility he had pneumonia. The question number 10 has to answer if that's the case, and if that was the case this afternoon. Well, leaving that last bit aside, I'm not sure they have to answer anything, to be fair. But would that fit with how this disease develops?
Yes, I mean, clearly I can't talk about an individual. As a doctor myself, I can't talk about an individual's care. But in general terms, one of the things about COVID-19 is that actually people often deteriorate very slowly. And you can actually start off and be quite well for about a week or so, and then gradually you find it more difficult to breathe. You need to go on to oxygen, and then if you continue to deteriorate, then you may well need to go on to ventilation. But I would say that at any of these points in the people can turn round and then they can start getting better. So it's always a sort of a battle between the body's natural defense mechanisms and the virus, and sometimes sadly the virus wins, but often and usually in fact the body's defensive systems win, and people ultimately recover.